Good morning. We're going to call the K-12 Higher Education CIP Joint Subcommittee. And I would ask Madam Secretary to take the roll.
Senator Canizaro. Senator Dondero Loop. Senator Neal. Senator Severs-Ganser. Senator Titus. Assemblywoman Howdigee. Assemblywoman Kasama. Assemblyman Miller. Assemblywoman Monroe Marino. Assemblyman O'Neill. Assemblywoman Peters. Assemblyman Yeager. Chair Backus.
Present, and please mark Majority Leader Canizaro absent excused, and Majority Leader Howdigee present once she arrives. Today we may have other members of our subcommittee presenting bills in other committees, so people may be leaving throughout our hearing. With that, we have a variety of budget closings for the Nevada system of higher education, and I will go ahead and turn it over to fiscal staff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, members of the subcommittee. For the record, J. Marie Mangoba from the Fiscal Analysis Division, and I'm here to present the budget closing for the Nevada system of higher education, starting with the WICHE loans and stipends budget. This was heard by this subcommittee on February 21st. There's only one major closing issue for this budget, and that's the continued funding for the Professional Student Exchange Program, which I would refer to as the PSEP, and the Health Professional Education Program, which I would refer to as HPEP. The governor recommends total funding of $2.8 million over the 2023-25 biennium, which includes $2.6 million in general fund appropriations and $205,890 in loan repayment revenues to support participant slots through the WICHE loans and stipends budget. The governor's budget, as originally submitted, includes additional general fund appropriations of $634,200 over the biennium through enhancement decision units E350 and E351 to fund 33 HPEP slots and 4 PSEP veterinary medicine slots, respectively. However, the governor's recommended base budget includes sufficient funding to support 100% of all slots that are recommended to be funded over the 2023-25 biennium, including those identified in decision units E350 and E351. As such, Budget Amendment A2305-62681 was submitted by the Governor's Finance Office to eliminate the duplicate funding in decision units E350 and E351, reducing general fund appropriations by $634,200 over the biennium. The Governor's recommended budget, as amended, includes total funding of $2.2 million over the biennium to support 87 participant slots in fiscal year 24 and 85 participant slots in fiscal year 25. Additionally, the slot matrix included in the executive budget, which identifies the professional health areas, support fee amount, and number of funded slots, includes total expenditures of $1.6 million over the biennium, which indicates includes formula errors and was based on initial review projections that did not include projected loan repayment revenues. On February 9th, the Governor's Finance Office and WICHE submitted a revised slot matrix which identifies a total funding need of $2.2 million over the 2023-25 biennium, which includes $2 million in general fund appropriations and $205,990 in loan repayment revenues to fund 87 program slots in fiscal year 24 and 85 slots in fiscal year 25. The table on page 5 provides a comparison of the actual and the legislatively approved program slots funded in fiscal year 23 and the governor recommended program slots as revised for the 2023-25 biennium. For background, the 2021 legislature approved funding to support a total of 91 program slots in each year of the 2021-23 biennium, as well as funding for 3 psychology internships, which is passed through the Department of Health and Human Services Division of Public and Behavioral Health. However, as shown on the previous table, only 60 and 68 slots were filled in fiscal year 22 and fiscal year 23, respectively, which according to WICHE is due to a decrease in revenue collections resulting from the elimination of the loan component of both the HPAP and the PSEP programs. By way of background, the 2021 legislature approved Assembly Bill 247, which in part eliminated the 25% loan component of the PSEP unless the participant does not meet certain requirements after graduation. Additionally, the Commission, at its November 2019 meeting, voted to remove the 10% loan component for all future HPEP students and made the HPEP support fee a forgivable stipend upon completion of employment requirements. The governor recommends total expenditures of $282,200 over the biennium to fund 4 new veterinary medicine slots in each year of the 2023-25 biennium. The executive budget also continues the pass-through funding of $112,500 each year to the Division of Public and Behavioral Health to support 3 psychology internships. During the budget hearing on February 21st, WICHE testified it conducts outreach to universities, deans, officers, and students, and plans to conduct in-person on-site visits to campuses to market WICHE programs, including the available program slots and qualifications. The 2021 Money Committees reissued a letter of intent, which is issued to WICHE each biennium since 2009, permitting WICHE to administratively adjust the allocation of slots between fields to meet student demand. The Money Committees previously directed WICHE to inform LCB fiscal staff in writing of any changes to the mix of slots approved by the legislature within 30 days from the approved change for reporting to the Interim Finance Committee. Additionally, the 2021 Money Committees approved language in the Authorizations Act to allow WICHE to balance forward unexpended fee revenues received after May 15th of each year if the revenues balanced forward were expended on HPEP slots. For the decision for the subcommittee is on page 7. Does the subcommittee wish to recommend total funding of $2.2 million over the 2023-25 biennium, including general fund appropriations of $2 million and loan repayment revenues of $205,990, which is reflective of Budget Amendment A2305-62681 to eliminate decision units E350 and 351, for support of the Professional Student Exchange Program, the Health Professional Education Program, and the Psychology Internship Program for the WICHE loans and stipends budget as reflected on the attached slot matrix. Additionally, does the subcommittee wish to reissue a letter of intent allowing WICHE to reallocate student slots between fields to meet student demand, to instruct WICHE to report to the Interim Finance Committee within 30 days of any such reallocations, and to include language in the Authorizations Act to allow WICHE to balance forward unexpended fee revenues received after May 15th of each year to support the HPEP.
Thank you so much. Committee, do we have any questions regarding this budget item? With that, I'll entertain a motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I would move to approve this as read by staff.
Thank you so much. I have a first from Senator Dondero Loop and a second from Assemblywoman Monroe Marino. All those in favor say, are there any questions regarding, are there any comments regarding the motion? With that, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. The motion carries.
There are no major other closing items for this budget. The next page, staff had provided a copy of the slot matrix for the 2023-25 biennium. On page 9, I'll be happy to answer any questions. If not, I'll move on to the next budget. The next budget on page 11 is the WICHE administration budget. The subcommittee has not previously reviewed this budget. There are no major closing issues and no other closing items for this budget. Fiscal staff recommends this budget be closed as recommended by the governor and requests authority for staff to make technical adjustments as necessary.
Thank you. With that, are there any questions regarding this budget item? With that, I'll go ahead and entertain a motion.
I would move that we give fiscal staff the authority to close this budget.
Thank you. I have a first from, do we have any, I have a first from Senator Dondero Loop, a second from Assemblywoman Monroe Marino. Are there any questions or comments regarding the motion? With that, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. The motion carries.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Starting on page 13 is the budget closing for the Nevada System of Higher Education, which is different from the other budget closings since it's presented as a system-wide as opposed to by budget account. This was previously heard by the subcommittee on February 21st. There are 7 major closing issues, and staff plans to start discussing the structure and the components of the NSHE funding formula in major closing item 1, then the individual enhancement decision units recommended by the governor, and a discussion of how these components or enhancements could be treated either as a carve-out or pre-formula allocation or distributed through the formula based on each institution's proportionate share of the weighted student credit hours. The higher education formula is not in statute, but rather is budget policy approved by the legislature. The structure of the funding formula budget can be described under 3 parts. For visual purposes, staff has provided attachment A, which you can find on page 51 and 52 of your packet. This shows the governor recommended funding formula. So the first structure is the base maintenance and enhancement. The calculation of this base maintenance and enhancement decision units determine the total general fund appropriations for each of the 7 instructional institutions. And if you look at attachment A, that is the bottom box. The next structure of the funding formula, which you can find at the top box of attachment A, is the formula distribution. The distribution of the available general fund appropriation amongst each of the 7 instructional institutions based on their proportionate share of the weighted student credit hours. Budget policy decisions determine which components of the funding will be carved out from the total general fund appropriations to determine the amount of available funds for distribution through the formula based upon the institution's proportionate share of the weighted student credit hours. Since certain maintenance and enhancement decision units are specific to an institution, these are typically treated as a pre-formula allocation or a carve-out, such as the small institution factor in the research, operation, and maintenance funding for the 2 universities. The third component of the funding formula is the performance funding pool. The existing budget policy includes a performance funding component which sets aside 20% of the total general fund appropriations for each of the 7 instructional formula budgets and is earned back by the institutions if certain performance metrics or goals are met. Starting on page 15, I'll be discussing the major components of the NSHE funding formula for the 7 instructional formula budget, starting with the weighted student credit hours. And if you're looking at the attachment A, this is the column E on the top table. The general fund appropriations recommended for the 2023-25 biennium instructional budgets for UNR, UNLV, CSN, GBC, TMCC, WNC, and NSC are primarily based upon the count of the weighted student credit hours completed by Nevada resident students. The value of each weighted student credit hours is uniform across all institutions and is calculated by dividing the available general fund appropriations in each fiscal year after the distribution of any pre-formula allocations by the total number of fiscal year 22 weighted student credit hours. For fiscal year 24 and 25, the governor recommends calculated general fund value of a weighted student credit hour of $172.78 in fiscal year 24 and $173.54 in fiscal year 25. The next component is the weighted student credit hour caseload adjustment. The governor recommends general fund reductions of $15.6 million in each year of the 2023-25 biennium based on a decrease of 93,340 weighted student credit hours in fiscal year 22 compared to the fiscal year 2020 weighted student credit hours. This is calculated by taking the difference in the weighted student credit hours between 2020 and 2022, multiplied by the legislatively approved weighted student credit hour value in the work program year, which is $166.90. This is the first instance in which overall caseload across the 7 instructional institutions results in a reduction of funding for distribution through the formula since its implementation. The table on page 16 provides the caseload adjustment by institution. However, I would note that while a dollar amount is calculated from the change in the weighted student credit hours for each institution, as reflected in that previous table, the total amount from all 7 institutions reduces the pool of available general fund appropriations for distribution through the funding formula based on each institution's proportionate share of the total weighted student credit hours. The overall effect of distributing the caseload adjustment funding through the formula is shown in the table on page 17. And as shown on this table, while UNLV, WNC, and NSC experienced a growth in their weighted student credit hour and generated additional funding resulting from that caseload growth, these institutions, as well as the institutions that experienced a decline in weighted student credit our caseload experienced a decrease in funding as a result of that total caseload funding amount from all 7 institutions being distributed through the formula. So the decision for the subcommittee on page 17 is, does the subcommittee wish to recommend approving the governor's recommendation to reduce general fund appropriations by $15.6 million in each year of the 2023-25 biennium, resulting from a decrease in weighted student credit hours through the caseload adjustments based on the fiscal year 23 calculated weighted student credit hour value of $166.90.
Thank you so much. Do we have any questions regarding this decision unit? With that, I'll entertain a motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that the subcommittee approve the governor's recommendation to reduce the general fund appropriations by $15.6 million in each year of the 2023-25 biennium and decrease the weighted student credit hours throughout caseload adjustments based on the FY23 calculated weighted student credit hour value of $166.90.
I have a first from Senator Dondero Loop, a second from Assemblywoman Monroe Marino. Are there any questions or comments regarding the motion? With that, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. The motion carries and the recommendation will be made to the full committee.
The next component of the funding formula is the small institution funding. And if you're looking at attachment A, that is column B of the top table. The governor recommends the GBC and WNC collectively receive general fund appropriations totaling $865,560 in each year of the 2023-25 biennium as a result of the small institution factor calculation. These are additional funding for administrative costs provided to GBC and WNC due to its weighted student credit hour falling below 100,000. The decision for the subcommittee on page 18 is, does the subcommittee wish to recommend the GBC and WNC receive general fund appropriations totaling $865,560 collectively in each fiscal year of the 2023-25 biennium for small institution funding?
Thank you. Are there any questions regarding this decision unit? With that, we'll go ahead and entertain a motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So moved.
Thank you. I have a first from Senator Dondero Loop, a second from Assemblywoman Monroe Marino. Are there any questions or remarks regarding the motion? With that, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. The motion carries, and the decision will be made to the committee of the whole.
The next component of the funding formula is the research space operations and maintenance. And if you're looking at attachment A, this is column C of the top table. The governor recommends general fund appropriations of $10.1 million in each year of the 2023-25 biennium in dedicated research space operations and maintenance funding for UNR and UNLV. The table at the bottom of page 18 provides the governor recommended O&M for each of the universities. In general, research O&M funding is determined by identifying dedicated research space square footage at each university and the associated expenditures. State funding in support of O&M costs have generally increased over time. However, the governor recommended O&M expenditures decreased by 1.9% in each year when compared to the fiscal year 23 amount. And she indicates UNLV excluded animal care space from the research space calculation and changed its methodology in calculating common space, resulting in a decrease in dedicated research space, while UNR experienced a decrease in total O&M expenditures in fiscal year 22, resulting in an overall decrease of funding for research and O&M. The decision for the subcommittee on page 19 is, does the subcommittee wish to approve general fund appropriations totaling $10.1 million in each fiscal year of the 2023-25 biennium to fund research space operations and maintenance funding for UNLV and UNR?
Thank you. Are there any questions regarding this decision? With that, I'll go ahead and entertain a motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I would move to approve as read by staff.
Thank you. I have a first from Senator Dondero Loop, a second from Assemblywoman Monroe Marino. Are there any discussions regarding the motion? With that, those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. The motion carries and the recommendation will be forwarded to the Joint Committee.
The next component of the funding formula is the performance funding pool set aside. And if you're looking at attachment A, this is the column G, which is the total available general fund appropriations multiplied by 20%. The governor recommends an approximate 20% set aside of general fund appropriations for the performance funding pool of $106.9 million in fiscal year 24 and $107.3 million in fiscal year 25, transferred from each institution's instructional budget to the performance funding pool budget. Based on the institution's performance, funds will then be transferred from the performance funding pool budget to the applicable institution's instructional budget upon approval of the IFC. Performance measures are specific to each institution and generally include metrics such as the number of degrees or certificates issued. Since the adoption of the performance funding pool, the legislature has given the Board of Regents authority to establish and periodically revise the metrics and performance targets for each institution. Under the current budget policy, in order to allow for sufficient advanced planning and budgeting of operational costs, the performance funding earned in a fiscal year is based on actual performance from 2 years prior, which allows performance funding to be available for and transferred to institutions at the beginning of the fiscal year. According to the system, all institutions qualify for 100% of the available performance funding pool in fiscal year 24 based on outcomes achieved in fiscal year 22. The existing budget policy established by the Money Committees calculates the 20% performance funding set aside on the total general fund appropriations after all decision units are considered. As recommended by the governor, performance funding set aside for each institution excludes the governor's recommendation to increase funding for graduate assistant stipends and the number of graduate assistant positions, summer teaching education programs, and the 2-grade pay increase for university police officers, which understated the 20% performance funding set aside. According to NSHE, this funding was inadvertently excluded from the performance funding calculation and should be included in the calculation of the total general fund appropriations. Inclusive of all the decision units, the total performance funding pool set aside totals to $108.8 million in fiscal year 24 and $110 million in fiscal year 25, representing a $2 million and a $2.7 million increase respectively when compared to the total performance funding pool set aside in the governor's recommended budget. If the policy is continued, the 20% performance funding pool set aside amounts for each instructional institution will be dependent upon decisions to be made under major closing item number 5. So the decision for the subcommittee on page 21 is, does the subcommittee wish to recommend continuing existing policy to set aside 20% of general fund appropriations for the performance funding pool? If so, fiscal staff request authority to make technical adjustments to the performance pool set-aside amounts based on the action to be taken by the subcommittee under Major Closing Issue 5. If the subcommittee approved to continue the performance funding pool policy, does the subcommittee wish to include fiscal year 24 performance funding in each institution's general fund appropriation, removing the need for the institution to submit work programs for the interim finance committee consideration to facilitate a known transfer of performance funding for fiscal year 24?
Thank you so much. Do we have any questions regarding this decision? I'll go to Senator Neal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, first question, and I don't know if Inchi should answer this question. So, isn't there a bill moving on a study on performance metrics and weights? To research it or adjust it in the interim?
Yeah, I would welcome Inchi up to the front. Thank you so much, Chancellor.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, I'm Dale Urquiaga, the acting chancellor at the Nevada System of Higher Education. Through the chair to Senator Neal, the Senate Education Committee has amended SB 347 to create a commission to study higher education funding during the interim. That bill has been, if memory serves, referred to the Senate Committee on Finance and has not been heard there. In addition to that measure, Governor Lombardo recommended a study of both the funding formula and Inchi's accountability and transparency over self-supporting accounts, I believe is the language the governor used. So short answer, yes, there's a bill moving. And two, yes, there has been much conversation about an interim study, but nothing has finalized.
So, what's the effect of this decision, knowing that it's probably going to come out, but what's the effect of this decision on that?
For the record, Dale Urquiaga, I'm doing math in my head, which is dangerous. The performance pool that is before you today would get us through this biennium, and any changes that the institution or that the legislature would make to the institution's funding formula would occur in the 25 legislature. So I think that this performance funding would roll through the biennium without any impact of the study, and then should the body change the funding formula in the future, we would forecast metrics differently, or there would be new measures established. But I don't believe this money would be impacted, and your staff seems to be agreeing with me.
Okay, because that's what I was wondering, because the bottom half of that decision said that removing the need for the institution to submit work programs for consideration of known transfer of performance funding in FY24. That's why I wanted to see if there was make sense?
For the record, Brody Leiser with LCB Fiscal. Senator Neal, that last piece of the decision box on page 21, let me back up. I would agree with the Chancellor in so much as the decision point here would be related to the funding policy for the upcoming biennium, the bill that's in Senate Finance, and then potentially the bill that I believe has not yet been introduced for the governor's recommendation to do a funding formula study would potentially impact the 2025-27 biennium going forward. Specifically, the second portion of the decision box on page 21 is if the subcommittee wishes to continue the 20% set aside under the existing policy for the performance funding pool, the institutions and the board we already have the final metrics from fiscal year 2022, which drive the performance goals and funding for fiscal year 2024. And this decision point would just be to allow for the 20% set aside, rather than being put in a separate performance funding pool budget, to be appropriated directly to the institutions, because we already know that they've hit their metrics to achieve this funding. What that would do would prevent the institutions from having to come forward through the work program process for consideration by the IFC to have those funds transferred from the performance funding pool budget back to the institutions, given that we know what the results are that drive that funding for fiscal year '24.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Leiser. Thank you, Chancellor, for those answers. Do we have any other questions regarding this decision? With that, I would go ahead and entertain a motion. Senator Dondero Lope.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I would move to approve continuing existing policy to set aside 20% of the general fund appropriations for the performance funding pool, and also move to approve fiscal staff having the authority to make technical adjustments to the performance pool set-aside amounts based on action to be taken by the subcommittee under major closing issue number 5. I would also move to approve to continue the performance funding pool policy and include fiscal year 2024 performance funding in each institution's general fund appropriation, removing the need for the institutions to submit work programs for the interim finance committee consideration to facilitate a known transfer of performance funding for fiscal year '24.
Thank you. Can I have a second? Second, perfect. I have a first from Senator Dondero Loop, a second from Assemblywoman Monroe Marino. Is there any discussion on the motion? With that, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. The motion carries and the recommendation will be made to the Joint Committee.
Continuing on page 22, the second major closing issue is the restoration of general fund reductions approved by the 2021 legislature. The governor recommends general fund appropriations of $37.4 million in each year of the 2023-25 biennium to restore the budget reductions approved by the 2021 legislature for the 2021-23 biennium. And she indicates the executive budget recommendations would fully restore all general fund reductions approved by the 2021 legislature. And the table on page 23 summarizes the recommended budget restoration in each year of the 2023-25 biennium. The decision for the subcommittee on page 24 is does the subcommittee wish to approve $37.4 million in general fund appropriations across all NC state-supported budgets in each year of the 2023-25 biennium to restore budget reductions approved during the 2021 legislative session.
Thank you. Do we have any questions regarding this decision? With that, I'll entertain a motion.
So moved as stated by staff, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I have a first from Senator Dondero Loop, a second from Assemblywoman Monroe Marino. Is there any discussion on the motion? With that, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. The motion carries and the recommendation will be made to the Joint Committee.
The third major closing issue is the increased graduate assistant positions and stipends at UNR and UNLV. The governor recommends general fund appropriations of $1.9 million for UNR and $8.1 million for UNLV over the 2023-25 biennium to increase the number of graduate assistant stipends. According to NSHE, Nevada's graduate assistant stipends are insufficient to recruit, retain, and support the graduate student community. Further, graduate assistants experience financial stress due to rapidly increasing housing market costs, high inflation, and the high cost of medical care, which negatively impacts their mental and physical well-being. According to NSHE, the minimum stipends for master's students at UNR is currently at $16,000 per year, and the governor's recommendation, if approved, would increase UNR master's stipends from $16,000 to $17,000 per year, and UNLV's master's stipends from $11,250 to $17,000 per year. It would also increase doctoral stipends by $2,000 per year for UNR and $3,000 to $5,750 per year for UNLV, depending on the current baseline rate in different UNLV colleges. During the budget hearing, the subcommittee asked NSHE the factors considered in determining the amounts recommended for stipends between UNR and UNLV. And she indicated that the two universities considered inflation, particularly housing costs, which pose an economic burden on graduate students across the state. The decision for the subcommittee on page 25 is, does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of $9.9 million in general fund appropriations over the 2023-25 biennium for UNR and UNLV to increase graduate assistant stipends?
Are there any questions regarding this decision? With that, I'll entertain a motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So moved.
Thank you. I have a first from Senator Dondero Loop, a second from Assemblywoman Monroe Marino. Is there any discussion on the motion? With that, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. The motion carries and the recommendation will be made to the Joint Committee.
Continuing on page 25, the governor recommends general fund appropriations of $4 million for UNR and $6 million for UNLV over the 2023-25 biennium to increase the number of graduate assistant positions. And she indicates the recommendation to increase the number of graduate assistant positions would help recruit and retain highly qualified students, grow and diversify the doctoral student population, confer additional doctoral degrees, and help maintain the Carnegie classification of institutions of higher education R1 status. And she indicates the existing funding provided for UNLV and UNR is not sufficient to sustain the level of graduate assistant positions to meet the Carnegie R1 status ranking. Further, and she indicates it would allow UNR and UNLV to be more competitive with other R1 research universities in attracting the best students nationally. The decision for the subcommittee on page 26 is, does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of $10.1 million in general fund appropriations over the 2023-25 biennium for UNR and UNLV to increase the graduate assistant positions?
Thank you so much. Is there any questions regarding this decision? With that, I'll take a motion.
So moved, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. I have a first from Senator Dondero Loop and a second from Assemblywoman Monroe Marino. Is there any discussion on the motion? With that, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. The motion carries and the recommendation will be made to the Joint Full Committee.
Continuing on, for the fourth major closing issue is the funding for summer teacher education programs at UNR, UNLV, CSN, GBC, and NSC. The governor recommends general fund appropriations of $1 million in each year of the 2023-25 biennium for summer teacher education courses to improve the teacher pipeline. The table provided in the middle page of 26 provides the summer school funding by institution. And she indicates UNLV, UNR, CSN, GBC, and NSC would use majority of the funds for instructional faculty and other resources necessary to expand the classes it offers, with the remaining funds for student aid to lower the financial burden on students, as traditional sources of summer financial aid are limited. The table at the bottom of page 26 provides the projected number of students each institution would serve and the weighted student credit hours that will be generated if the recommendation is approved. The decision for the subcommittee on page 27 is, does the subcommittee wish to recommend approval of $1 million in general fund appropriations in each fiscal year of the 2023-25 biennium for support of summer teacher education programs at UNR, UNLV, CSN, GBC, and NSC, and establish a budget policy that these summer courses would be intended to be supported with state general fund appropriations and student-derived revenues in the state-supported budget on an ongoing basis.
Thank you. Are there any questions regarding this decision? With that, I'll entertain a motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And with that, I would move to approve as read by staff.
Thank you. I have a first from Senator Dondero Loop, a second from Assemblywoman Howdicky. Is there any discussion regarding the motion? With that, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. The motion carries and the recommendation will be made to the Joint Full Committee.
Continuing on to the fifth major closing issue on page 27 is the funding formula distribution and general fund allocation consideration for instructional formula budgets. The following information on page 28 details the considerations for the subcommittee with the governor's recommended funding formula for the 2023-25 biennium. Based on these considerations, as well as the potential for the funding of NSHE institution to be studied during the 2023-24 interim, which may or may not result in the continuation of, changes to, or replacement of the existing funding formula policy for the 2025-27 biennium. Fiscal staff has presented options for consideration by the subcommittee whether to continue the distribution component of the funding formula or to suspend the distribution component for the 2023-25 biennium. So the governor recommends $24 million in each year of the 2023-25 biennium for the 7 instructional formula budgets to restore the general fund budget reductions approved by the 2021 legislature. The governor's recommended budget includes this restoration funding in the total available general funds, which is distributed through the funding formula rather than as a carve-out. Not treating the budget restoration as a carve-out in the governor's recommended budget is inconsistent with how the reductions were treated in the legislatively approved budget for the 2021-23 biennium. And just for background, the 2021 legislature approved budget reductions totaling $61.5 million in each year of the 2021-23 biennium for all 7 instructional formula budgets, which were approved as institutional carve-outs in the funding formula. Including the budget reductions in the funding formula as a carve-out ensured that the budget reductions identified for each institution were made to each institution's budget, rather than the total reduction being distributed across all 7 institutions based upon their proportionate share of the weighted student credit hours. While the recommendation to include this funding with the total available general funds to be distributed through the funding formula, the individual institutions will not actually receive an amount equal to that identified as a budget restoration within the decision units. The table at the bottom of page 28 provides the overall effect in each fiscal year of distributing the recommended budget restoration through the formula. And this, I would just note that this table only reflects E275 and E276. NSHE indicates that including the recommended budget restoration as part of the total available funds for distribution through the funding formula distribution was intentional and consistent with how general fund restoration in the base budget are recommended. The base budget general fund restoration are associated with the continuation of positions that are currently funded with the federal ARPA coronavirus state fiscal recovery funds rather than being included in the restoration decision units. When all base budget and enhancement restoration general fund appropriations are considered, UNLV, GBC, WNC, and NSC would receive funding in excess of their budget reduction, while UNR, CSN, and TMCC would receive less. The table on page 29 just shows the overall effect of distributing all the budget restoration, inclusive of the base budget restoration, through the funding formula. The effect of the governor's recommended approach to distribute the general fund restoration through the formula is that the calculated weighted student credit hours value is higher than it would be if the budget restorations were treated consistent with how the reductions were approved as a carve-out in the legislatively approved budget for the 2021-23 biennium. As indicated previously, the governor recommended weighted student credit hour value is $172.78 and $173.54 in fiscal year 24 and fiscal year 25, respectively. Based on fiscal staff calculation, if the budget restorations were treated as a pre-formula distribution or a carve-out and not distributed through the funding formula, this would result in a lower calculated weighted student credit hour value of $152.47 in fiscal year 24 and $153.24 in fiscal year 25. The governor recommends, with regards to the impact to the enrollment recovery, one-time general fund appropriations for enrollment recovery, the governor recommends one-time general fund appropriations of $12.6 million in fiscal year '23 for use over the 2023-25 biennium for enrollment recovery for GBC, CSN, and TMCC to mitigate the loss of funding due to a decrease in enrollment, which NSHE attributes to the COVID-19 pandemic. The table on page 30 illustrates the calculation used to determine the recommended enrollment recovery funding for each of the three institutions. According to NSHE, the intent is to hold these institutions harmless and maintain their current fiscal year '23 funding level, which would allow these institutions to maintain current staffing levels. While the recommendations on the one-time appropriations for enrollment recovery will be considered through legislation at a future date, this information is being provided as the options presented below would impact the amounts calculated for this purpose, and fiscal staff wants to ensure that any impacts are identified as part of this closing in advance of considering the one-time appropriation through the bill process at a future date. As noted at the beginning of this section, options are being presented for consideration by the subcommittee whether to continue the distribution component of the funding formula or to suspend the distribution component for the 2023-25 biennium. Overall, there is no difference in total general fund appropriation across all 7 institutions. However, each individual institution would receive different amounts under each of the options. So, starting on page 31, the first option would be the governor recommended approach. And for visual representation, if you would look at attachment B, which you can find on page 53 to 54 of your packet, this option would continue the policy to distribute available general funds through the funding formula and would include the governor's recommended budget restoration of general fund reductions approved by the 2021 legislature, totaling $61.5 million in each year, to be distributed through the funding formula based on each institution's proportionate share of the weighted student credit hours, and would treat items A through E, which staff had provided on page 31, as a carve-out or a pre-formula allocation. Under option 1, the calculated value of the weighted student credit hours is $172.78 in fiscal year '24 and $173.54 in fiscal year '25 as recommended by the governor. Inclusive of the budget amendments for a 2-grade salary increase for university police lieutenants and sergeant positions, the impact to the one-time general fund appropriations for enrollment recovery would be $11.8 million, which represents a decrease of about $817,404 under option 1. Moving on to page 32, the table on top of page 32 just provides the 20% performance funding pool set aside in fiscal year '24 and '25 compared to the governor recommended performance funding pool under option 1. For option 2, this is the all carve-out approach, which is provided for you in attachment C, which you can find on page 55 and 56 of this packet. This option would continue the policy to distribute available general funds through the funding formula and will treat all enhancement decision units, the small institution factor, the research O&M funding, and all budget restoration, inclusive of the base budget restoration, as a pre-formula distribution allocation or a carve-out. Under this approach, all budget restorations will go directly to the applicable institution and will not be distributed through the formula based on each institution's proportionate share of the weighted student credit hours. The table on top of page 33 details the overall effect of including the restoration of general funds as a pre-formula distribution or a carve-out compared to the governor's recommended budget as amended. Under option 2, the calculated value of the weighted student credit hour would be $152.47 in fiscal year '24 and $153.24 in fiscal year '25, which represents a decrease of approximately $20.30 per year when compared to the governor recommended value, and approximately $13 to $14 lower than the legislatively approved weighted student credit hour value. Based on the methodology in the governor's recommended budget to calculate the one-time funding for enrollment recovery, this approach would result in a calculated general fund savings of $2.5 million. And that's provided for you on the bottom table on page 33. The table on top of page 34 just provides the 20% performance funding pool set aside under option 2. The last option is option 3, which is the base maintenance enhancement approach, and this is provided to you in attachment D, which you can find on page 57 and 58 of your packet. This option would discontinue or suspend the policy to distribute available general funds through the funding formula and appropriate general funds under the traditional base maintenance and enhancement decision unit funding model. The table at the bottom of page 34 provides a comparison of the general fund appropriations in the governor's recommended budget compared to the traditional base maintenance and enhancement funding model for each of the 7 instructional institutions. Under option 3, there won't be any weighted student credit hour value that will be required to be calculated. Regarding the impact to the one-time general fund appropriations for enrollment recovery, this approach would result in additional calculated general fund appropriations of $470,342 over the 2023-25 biennium, as shown on the top table on page 35. The second table on page 35 just provides the 20% performance funding pool set aside under option 3. Starting on page 36, provides the total general fund appropriations for each of the 7 instructional institutions under the 3 options, as well as the differences between the 3 options. So the decision for the subcommittee on page 37 is, and I'll state this verbatim, does the subcommittee wish to continue the existing Option 1 is continue the existing budget policy of distributing total available general fund appropriations after all pre-formula allocations or carve-outs are applied based upon each institution's proportionate share of the weighted student credit hours, and approve the funding formula carve-out components, a calculated value of the weighted student credit hour of $172.78 in fiscal year 24 and $173.54 in fiscal year 25, and performance funding amounts as reflected under option 1 above and in attachment B. Or option 2 is continue the existing budget policy of distributing total available general fund appropriations after all pre-formula allocations or carve-outs are applied based upon each institution's proportionate share of the weighted student credit hours, and approve the funding formula carve-out components, a calculated value of the weighted student credit hour of $152.47 in fiscal year 24 and $153.24 in fiscal year 25, and performance funding amounts as reflected under option 2 above and in attachment C. Or option 3 is suspend the funding formula distribution and allocate general fund appropriations to each of the instructional institutions using the traditional base maintenance and enhancement decision unit model, and calculate the performance funding amounts as reflected under option 3 above and in attachment D. While this option would not result in the calculation of a weighted student credit hour value, the subcommittee could consider directing NSHE to work with the Governor's Finance Office and the Fiscal Analysis Division to apply a methodology consistent with the current funding formula policy to calculate such a value for use if a caseload decision unit based on weighted student credit hours is included in the budget requested by the Board of Regents in the 2025-27 biennium. Given the considerations with the options above and uncertainty surrounding the potential for a new funding methodology to be presented during the 2025 legislative session, if a funding formula study is approved over 2023-24 interim, the subcommittees may wish to recommend that NSHE present and submit a budget for the 2025-27 biennium in a manner consistent with the approach that is approved by the legislature for the 2023-25 biennium in the event that a new funding formula or methodology has not been developed in preparing the 2025-27 biennium budget, and or in order to compare the impacts of a recommendation to implement a new funding formula or methodology. Fiscal staff would request authority to make technical adjustments as necessary. If option 1 or 2 is chosen, technical adjustments, including those related to any statewide rate changes, may impact the final calculated value of the weighted student credit hours as compared to the amounts listed above.
Thank you so much. That was a lot. Do we have any questions regarding this decision? I may just want to ask one clarifying question. I may turn over to Mr. Elizer for a little more explanation. If we were to go with option 3, I think we're also used to the weighted student credit hour. And if we went with that, would there be any impact to what that may look like and how that may affect the next biennium if there is not a new funding formula that is agreed to via legislation that ends up passing this session?
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Brody Lizer with the Fiscal Analysis Division. I would just, in response to the question, would note that under all 3 options, as Ms. Mangova indicated, the total general fund for all 7 institutions would be the same. And so if option 3 were selected to use the base maintenance and enhancement decision methodology, as everyone's aware and decision points have been made up to this point through the closing, the funding formula has several components and several budget policy considerations, including the small institution factor, the research O&M, the performance funding pool, and then the funding formula distribution itself. And so option 3 would suspend that funding formula distribution component. But it would, again, still appropriate overall the same level of funding that is included in the governor's recommended budget, for which there was a calculated value of the weighted student credit hour of about $173 per fiscal year. Under option 3, with the suspension of the formula distribution, the value of the weighted student credit hour it's an output calculation. And so that exercise is done with the distribution component. And so by suspending the formula, there would not necessarily be a calculated value of the weighted student credit hour as a result of going down the road of the base maintenance and enhancement methodology. One of the considerations that you have before you under option 3 would be in the event, as was discussed, that in the event that caseload consideration came forward next biennium, how to base that caseload. If it was dependent on weighted student credit hours, of how would you come up with a calculated value? And there's consideration there that while option 3 would suspend the distribution funding formula component, I believe that we could still work with NSHE and the governor's finance office to look at the overall funding that would be recommended through base maintenance enhancement, exclude the things that otherwise would be carved out, such as the small institution factor, the research O&M space. There's some, I believe, some direct appropriations that would be considered, the graduate assistants. Remove those things to still perform a calculation that could be used, that probably would be pretty similar to what came forward in the governor's recommended budget for the value of about $173 per year per weighted student credit hour value. In providing staff and/or the system office with that direction would be considered somewhat of a backstop, because there are some unknowns. There's some discussions right now about performing a study during the interim on how the higher education budget should be funded. We don't know at this time what that study is actually going to look like, or what the direction will come out of this body if funding is approved to perform such a study. And so with those unknowns, what that option would do would just be to provide some direction to NSHE in how to build their budget going forward, short of specific direction that may or may not come out of a study that has yet to be approved at this point.
Thank you so much for that. Do we have any other questions regarding this decision? We'll go to Senator Severs-Gansert.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate staff's explanation of all the different information, and it appears to me like there's just not really fairness in that, because you're not really restoring to the individual institutions. So, and I'm a little concerned about 3, because that means we're just completely throwing out the formula. But I think 2 or 3 would be more fair. But again, as just stated, I'm not sure. We'd have to figure out how to move towards the next biennium if we didn't use the formula at all. So I kind of lean towards 2, because we've had this formula for a while and it's been working well. And we have some unusual circumstances this time. And we absolutely do need to look at the formula, revise the formula. But I'd like to rule out 1, because I don't think there's equity in that one. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Do we have any other questions or comment regarding the decision unit? I'll go to Senator Titus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Senator Severs-Gansert, for the comment. I see option 3 as making a lot of work for a lot of people with a lot of unknowns, where the reality is number 2 has a defined numbers. We keep the current policy while we're with the carve out, while we're then doing future studies on a bill that we don't even know is going to come out, or how the formula is going to come out. So I think it makes a lot more sense to stick with 2. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll go to Assemblywoman Howdeggy.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I agree. I agree that option 1 is just not equitable, but it was my understanding that the Nevada system of higher education comfort level was with either option 1 or option 3, and so I would feel more comfortable going with option 3 again, because like Mr. Leiser said, it keeps the funding the same as option 1, but just with the restoration of the budget cuts keeps it more equitable there. So my comfort level would be with number 3, and again, I know that's where the comfort level of NSHE was as well.
Thank you. And I just wanted to also echo, one of the things is looking at 1 and 2, and also taking into consideration 3 that doesn't have the weighted student credit hour, is right now, if we went with 2, we'd be reducing that weighted student credit hour, which could have like future impacts. So I just want to kind of add that. Do we have any other questions or comments regarding this decision? With that, I'll entertain a motion. Go to Senator Dondero Loop.
Thank you very much. So with that discussion being made, I would move to go with option number 3, along with the, trying to figure out where I start here, along with moving that we have a potential for a new funding methodology to be presented during the 25 legislative session as read by staff, and recommending to implement a new funding formula or methodology in the 25-27 biennium budget.
I think we got the motion. Do we have a second? Second. Thank you. We have a first from Senator Dondero Loop, a second from Assemblywoman Howdeggy. Is there any discussion on the motion? With that, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Nay. Okay, so the motion carries, and the recommendation will be made to the joint full committee. We're ready for the next. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Continuing on page 37 is the sixth major closing issue. The 2023-25 biennium. For the 2023-25 biennium, the Board of Regents approved an approximate 2.5% and 1.9% increase in fiscal year 24 and 25 respectively in the undergraduate and graduate registration fees and non-resident tuition at the universities, state college, and community colleges annually through academic year 2024 and 2025. The table on top of page 38 displays the Board of Regents approved fees. System-wide registration fees are projected to decrease by 2.8% from fiscal year 23 to fiscal year 24 and increase by 2% from fiscal year 24 to fiscal year 25. The amounts recommended for each of the 7 instructional institutions, as well as the professional schools, as well as the prison education program, are shown on the bottom table on page 38. Regarding the non-resident tuition, system-wide projects a decrease of 9.9% between fiscal year 23 and fiscal year 24, and an increase of 4.1% between fiscal year 24 and fiscal year 25, as shown in the table on page 39. The 2013 legislature initially adopted the recommendation that for purposes of determining the level of general fund appropriations to be budgeted in NSHE's state-supported operating budgets, budgeted non-general fund revenue should not offset the amount of general fund otherwise appropriated. The 2015, 17, 19, and 21 legislatures approved the continuation of this policy through the 2021-23 biennium, and the governor's recommended budget continues this policy for the 2023-25 biennium. And she is requesting that language previously approved in the Authorizations Act relating to this policy be continued in the 2023 Authorizations Act. As part of the policy decision, language was included in the 2021 Authorizations Act, allowing NSHE to balance forward any unexpected non-general fund revenues to the next fiscal year for authorized purposes. The 2021 legislature also approved language in the 2021 Authorizations Act to allow NSHE institutions to expend increases in non-resident tuition, registration fees, and miscellaneous student fee revenues without IFC approval, regardless of how the increased revenue is to be expended. The institutions are required to report to the IFC on a biannual basis on any additional registration fees and non-resident tuition, including how those funds were expended. So the decision for the subcommittee on page 41 is, does the subcommittee wish to approve the student-derived non-general fund revenues for the 7 formula instructional institutions, 4 professional schools, and the prison education budget as recommended by the governor? And does the subcommittee wish to approve the governor's recommendation to continue the current policy initially adopted by the 2013 legislature, that non-general fund revenues should not be used to offset the amount of general fund appropriations that would otherwise be budgeted? If the subcommittee approves the governor's recommendation to continue this policy, does the subcommittee wish to direct fiscal staff to include back language in the 2023 Authorizations Act to authorize NSHE to balance forward any unexpended non-general fund revenues to the next fiscal year for authorized purposes in the NSHE state-supported operating budgets, and authorize NSHE institutions to expend increases in non-resident tuition, registration fees, and miscellaneous student fee revenues without IFC approval, but with a requirement to report to the IFC regardless of how the increased revenue is to be expended?
Thank you. Are there any questions regarding this decision? With that, I'll entertain a motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would move to recommend this decision as read by staff.
Thank you. Do I have a second? I have a first from Senator Dondero Loop, a second from Assemblywoman Howdicky. Is there any discussion on the motion? With that, those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. The motion carries and the recommendation will be made to the Joint Full Committee.
Continuing on page 41 is the last major closing issue, number 7, regarding the Desert Research Institute funding policy revision. Under current budget policy, general fund appropriations for the DRI are based on a funding policy that utilizes three components. The first component is a research, grant, and contracts formula component, which is based on a sliding scale calculation. And the second component is an O&M component based on the traditional base maintenance and enhancement methodology. And the third component is an inflationary adjustment intended to capture expenditures not otherwise budgeted. Based upon the formula and increases in the DRI's grants and contracts, the governor recommends general fund appropriations of $235,559 in each year of the 2023-25 biennium. In total, the governor recommends general fund appropriations of $3.7 million each year for the DRI funding formula component based on grant and contract revenue of $35.6 million, as detailed in the table on top of page 42. The second component is the DRI O&M funding, which addresses costs associated with space utilization. The executive budget recommends increases in general fund appropriations of $365,568 in fiscal year 24 and $386,014 in fiscal year 25. The calculation used to determine the additional general fund appropriations in this decision unit includes funding from the agency requested budget and inadvertently was not updated to reflect changes in the governor's recommended budget, overstating the funding by $50,169 in fiscal year 24 and $50,199 in fiscal year 25. Fiscal staff recommends a technical adjustment to reduce general fund appropriations by $100,368 over the 2023-25 biennium. The third component is the inflationary adjustments. The governor recommends general fund appropriations of $276,051 in fiscal year 24 and $290,904 in fiscal year 25 to account for inflationary increases that are not otherwise specifically accounted for in the DRI formula. So the decision for the subcommittee on page 42 is, does the subcommittee wish to recommend approving general fund appropriations of $1.1 million over the 2023-25 biennium in decision units M101, M102, M207, and M216 for institutional support and research administration functions for the DRI based upon the existing DRI funding formula policy and as recommended by the governor, inclusive of the noted technical adjustment to reduce general fund appropriations by $100,368 in decision unit M216 over the 2023-25 biennium.
Thank you. Do we have any questions regarding this decision unit? And I'll take a motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I so move this decision as read by staff.
Thank you. I have a first from Senator John Darrow Loop, a second from Assemblywoman Howdigy. Is there any discussion on the motion? With that, those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. The motion carries and the recommendation will be made to the Joint Full Committee.
The governor recommends changing the funding policy for DRI by eliminating the sliding scale formula calculation based on the level of grants and contracts and returning to the base maintenance and enhancement model for the DRI's budget, increasing general fund appropriations by $2.1 million over the 2023-25 biennium in conjunction with a methodology change. During the budget hearing, the DRI indicated the decision to change the DRI funding formula from the base maintenance and enhancement model to the sliding scale calculation was made in 2013 with an anticipated increase in grant and contract revenue to be realized, which would have resulted in a growth in state funding based on the formula. However, the DRI indicates the sliding scale formula did not materialize into additional funding as was anticipated. The DRI indicates it loses approximately $1 million each year in funding, and although it has brought in additional grants in the last few years, state funds have not increased due to the funding formula. DRI further indicates it has had to use overhead cost to fill the gap created by the change in the funding formula. Through decision units E125 and E126, the governor recommends increasing general fund appropriations by $2.1 million over the biennium in conjunction with the methodology change. The following information on page 44, starting on page 44, details the calculation used by the DRI to determine the recommended funding associated with the projections, which appears to be based on an approach of calculating what funding would be for the 2023-25 biennium had the base maintenance and enhancement model been in place since fiscal year 2015. Starting with Decision Unit E125, the Governor recommends increasing general fund appropriations by $839,205 over the biennium to increase personnel expenditures, which is based on the difference between the targeted personnel expenditures of $7.3 million the DRI determined it should have in fiscal year 24 and 25 if the formula had not been implemented in fiscal year 15, and the total personnel expenditures recommended in the Governor's recommended budget. The decision unit includes $50,199 in each year for cost of living increases, which DRI indicates was inadvertently included and should be eliminated. If this decision unit is approved, fiscal staff recommends a technical adjustment to eliminate cost of living increases, which would reduce general fund appropriations by $50,199 in each year biennium. Since the cost of living and compensation adjustments approved by the legislature in a fiscal year are reflected in the base budget in each subsequent biennial budget, and the Governor's recommended budget includes inflationary adjustment for compensation benefits totaling $566,955 over the biennium in Decision Unit M102, it appears that Decision Unit E125 may be, in part, duplicative of compensation benefit inflationary adjustments. However, as previously noted, the DRI has indicated that the additional funding would allow for funding 2.15 full-time equivalent positions that are otherwise funded with indirect cost recovery funds. So the decision for the subcommittee on page 45 is, does the subcommittee wish to recommend approving the Governor's recommendation to change the funding policy for the DRI by eliminating the existing DRI-specific formula and therefore direct the DRI to build future biennial budgets using the base, maintenance, and enhancement model? And if so, does the subcommittee wish to recommend approving additional general fund appropriations totaling $738,807 over the 2023-25 biennium to increase funding for personnel expenditures, which in part would support 2.15 full-time equivalent positions, inclusive of the noted technical adjustment to remove cost of living increase of $50,199 in each fiscal year of the 2023-25 biennium.
Thank you. Are there any questions regarding this decision? With that, I'll entertain a motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I would move to approve as read by staff.
Thank you. I have a first from Senator John Darrow Loop, a second from Assemblywoman Haudegi. Is there any discussion on the motion? With that, those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. The motion carries and the recommendation will be made to the full joint committee.
Continuing on page 45 for Decision Unit E126, the Governor recommends increasing general fund appropriations by $1.3 million over the 2023-25 biennium to increase O&M expenditures, which is based on the difference between the targeted O&M expenditures of $2.2 million that the DRI determined it should have in fiscal year 24 and 25 if the formula had not been implemented in fiscal year 15, and the total O&M expenditures recommended in the Governor's recommended budget. The decision unit includes a CPI increase of $172,370 for O&M expenditures and an additional CPI adjustment of $201,207 for O&M square footage in each year of the biennium, which is based on a CPI of 20.1%, which according to DRI is based on an estimated average CPI for all urban consumers in June 2015 through October 2021. The DRI indicates that the recommendation for this additional funding would primarily pay for expected increases in operating costs. And staff had provided additional information regarding the DRI's projected increase in utilities, operating, and maintenance costs provided in the middle page, information presented in the middle page of 45. Based on the executive branch budget manual, inflationary adjustments are agency specific and approved by the budget division through an M100 decision unit. Additionally, special inflationary adjustments must be substantiated by adequate justification or documentation that specifically support the increase. And as such, utilizing a blanket CPI appear to be inconsistent with the executive branch budget manual. So the decision for the subcommittee on page 46 is A, does the subcommittee wish to recommend approving additional general fund appropriations totaling $1.3 million to increase funding for operations and maintenance expenditures, inclusive of the consumer price index adjustments for operating and maintenance expenditures as recommended by the governor? Or option B is, does the subcommittee wish to recommend approving additional general fund appropriations totaling $511,294 over the 2023-25 biennium for increased operating and maintenance expenditures, which would eliminate the recommended consumer price index adjustments totaling $747,154 over the 2023-25 biennium? Or option C is, does the subcommittee wish to recommend not approving additional general fund appropriations of $1.3 million to increase funding for operations and maintenance expenditures?
Thank you. Do we have any questions regarding this decision unit? I'll go to Assemblywoman Howdeggy.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I think I'm comfortable with this decision going with option B, and just for a couple of reasons. I know that DRI indicated that the increase for the CPI was just an estimate, and we usually need adequate justification or documentation to support this type of increase, and what they presented just appears to be inconsistent with the executive branch's budget manual, and so my comfort level would be approving some increase, but not all of the increase, and so I would be comfortable with going with option B.
Do we have any other questions regarding this decision unit? With that, I'll go ahead and take a motion.
Thank you very much. And I would move to approve option B as read by staff.
Thank you. We have a motion from Senator Dondero Loop, a second from Assemblywoman Howdeggy. Is there any discussion on the motion? With that, those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. The motion carries and the recommendation will be made to the Joint Full Committee.
Continuing on page 46, there are 4 other closing items, which includes funding for the non-formula and professional school budgets and recommendations to continue a letter of intent related to position reconciliation and existing language in the Appropriations Act. The decisions for the subcommittee on page 48 is fiscal staff recommends the following. A is other closing items 1 and 2 be closed as recommended by the governor. And B, other closing item 3 be closed with the issuance of a letter of intent instructing NSHE to provide a report to the Interim Finance Committee specifically identifying new positions approved and eliminated by the Board of Regents compared to the positions approved in the budget by the 2023 Legislature for fiscal year 24 and fiscal year 25, and to instruct NSHE to clearly denote positions approved and eliminated by the Board of Regents as compared to the positions approved in the budget by the 2023 Legislature when preparing the 2025-27 budget. And C, other closing item 4 be closed with the direction to fiscal staff to include the reference back language in the 2023 Appropriations Act, and that back language is provided on top of page 48. Fiscal staff requests authority to make other technical adjustments as necessary.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions regarding this decision? I'll start with Senator Titus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just on page 47 with the list of the sub-grants or the other monies we're spending here, the two, UNR and UNLV, we do give them a substantial amount of money for athletics. And those two programs, I know not all of the different programs generate revenue, but there's revenues generated from those two programs. Since we're using general fund dollars to help support that, and I know they have other funds coming in, do we get reports on how, what they do with the revenue from those athletic programs?
Mr. Leiser, if you have some information, maybe we'll go to you.
We, sorry for the record, Brody Leiser. We do get a budget for what's included here in the state-supported budget for the intercollegiate athletic programs. I was just trying to pull up a summary of what's all included. But there are positions and operating costs that are included within these budgets. It's not a full picture of the athletic budget. There are some self-supporting budgets, including some of the revenues. I think that Senator Titus that you were referring to, those revenue-generating components are not part of the state-supported budget. But sorry, as I gather my thoughts here, there are some position costs that are funded in the state-supported budget. One of the other things that is funded through the state-supported budget through the intercollegiate athletics is scholarships and/or support for student athletes. That's also included as part of the state-supported budget. Beyond that, if you wanted additional detail, I'd have to scramble or probably phone a friend to provide more information beyond that.
Well, we certainly don't need to hold up this committee hearing with that question and that information, but I think, again, because we are using general fund dollars to support these programs, it would be nice to see a more detailed report on what are they spending our monies on, the taxpayers' monies on, and just more of a detailed report at some point. If they could get that to us, that'd be great.
You know what, Senator Titus, maybe I'll have Chancellor come up to kind of opine if we are missing information or if the report does adequately provide for those things. If not, we may ask for that just so that there could be more transparency in where the revenue coming in and how it's going out in light of the general funds also providing towards those.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, for the record, Dale Urquiaga, Acting Chancellor. Madam Chair, through you to Senator Titus, thank you for the question. We spoke briefly before this hearing, and I appreciate the advance warning. It allowed me to think. The athletic programs do prepare a report of the kind the senator is seeking for the board. I believe those reports go annually to the board. And if my memory serves, they just went to the board at its special meeting in April. And so what I would be more than happy to have included in the closing instructions here is a similar letter of intent for the chancellor or the system to provide those athletic reports to this body.
I will be happy to include that. Hopefully with the decision unit, we will make a motion to include that letter of intent. Thank you,
Thank you,
Chancellor.
ma'am.
Okay, thank you. With that, we'll go ahead and take a motion on this decision.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I would move that we approve closing items 1 and 2 as recommended by the governor. Also close item 3 with the issuance of a letter of intent instructing NSHE to provide a report to the interim committee specifically identifying new positions approved and eliminated by the Board of Regents compared to the positions approved in the budget 2023 legislature for fiscal years 2024 and 25, to instruct NSHE to clearly denote positions approved and eliminated by the Board of Regents as compared to the positions approved in the budget by the 23 legislature when preparing the 25-27 budget, and approve closing item 4 with the direction to fiscal staff to include the referenced back language in the 2023 Appropriations Act, and also ask NSHE to please provide athletic reports as discussed previously.
Thank you. Do we have a second? So I have a first from Senator Dondero Loop and a second from Assemblywoman Howdeggy. Is there any discussion on the motion? With that, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. The motion carries, and a recommendation will be made to the joint full committee. I appreciate our fiscal staff's assistance today. We are all done with our closing list, and with that, I will go ahead and open for public comment. Is there anyone here in Carson City wishing to make public comment this morning? Go ahead and start when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair Backus and members of the subcommittee. My name is Wesley Harper, W-E-S-L-E-Y-H-A-R-P-E-R, and I represent the City of Caliente. On behalf of the Mayor and City Council, I urge support of a one-time appropriation of $2.404 million to fund the planning and implementation of a regional strategic economic development plan for the City of Caliente and Lincoln County to promote a sustainable recreation economy. This appropriation would increase the probability that Amtrak passenger rail service would be restored to Las Vegas and to Caliente. It would support the state's current $2.6 million investment in the restoration of the Caliente train depot, and it would enable the city and the county to work collaboratively with the Bureau of Land Management. Currently, the city does not have the resources to maintain its outdoor recreation infrastructure or the resources to commission the planning or implementation of an economic development plan. Furthermore, now is the only foreseeable opportunity to restore Amtrak passenger rail service in southern Nevada. This is a request for a one-time appropriation of $2.404 million. I hope to work with each of you to advance this unique and important initiative. Again, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and members of the subcommittee for your attention.
Kent Irvin, ERVIN, Nevada Faculty Alliance. I just want to express my appreciation for all the hard work that the legislature, for the governor's recommended budget, for the work of fiscal staff and chief folks to get where we are today. The restorations will be a big help toward our goal, which is empowering our members to be fully engaged in our mission to help students succeed. Thank you so much.
Madam Chair, for the record, Dale Urquiaga, Acting Chancellor. I would echo my colleague from the Faculty Alliance. Thank you. This is my first and last budget for INCHI, and I appreciate your staff's assistance very much, and the work of this body, your staff and you as well. So on behalf of the Board of Regents and all of my 15,000 colleagues, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. With that, we'll go to Las Vegas. I don't know if anyone's in Las Vegas wishing to make public comment this morning, but if you are, please come up to the desk. It doesn't look like anyone's there. So we will go to the phone lines. BPS, is there anyone on the phone lines wishing to give public comment this morning?
Chair, the public line is open and working, but there are no callers at this time.
Fantastic. With that, we can go ahead and close our morning hearing.